Welcome to Sounding Board, a regular community access television program produced by club members of Seroptimus International of Novato, right here in Marin County. The mission of the organization is to improve the lives of women and girls through programs leading to social and economic empowerment. Today's program is a very serious topic. It's on human trafficking, right here in the North Bay, in Sonoma and Marin County. My name is Carol Bennett. I'm the moderator, and we have two very distinguished individuals to be with us today. First is Linda Witong, who has recently retired as the Deputy District Attorney for Marin County. We also have Chris Mahurin, I got it this time, Chris Mahurin of Santa Rosa City Police Department. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Now, we always hear news about human trafficking on the national level, on the international level, but right here, locally, ooh, help us set the stage if you like.
I'd be glad to start. Actually, my background also includes a stint as a delegate to the United Nations and also doing cold case investigations, both of which educated me even further about human trafficking on a global, national, and local scale. With respect to locally, it's here in Marin. We have,
scary.
First of all, California is one of the prime destinations for children, and I'm going to concentrate right now on children being trafficked. The average age being anywhere from 8 to 14 years old.
From 8?
When they're being recruited.
Wow.
Marin is a part of a hub, which starts in Southern California, goes up to San Francisco, through Marin, to Sonoma, and then circles around and goes throughout the United States and then comes back.
Wow.
Trafficking includes labor trafficking as well as sex trafficking. Again, I'll concentrate for the purposes of this discussion on sex trafficking. The Marin County recently had a bust, if you will, where Marin and the North Bay arrested a number of pimps, exploiters, and rescued 6 underage children. After the arrest happened, there were 2 25-year-old men who came forward who wanted to buy a 13-year-old. They were still part of the sting, but apparently hadn't read the news about the bust taking place. So they were from Marin County, right? So there is trafficking in Marin. There are purchases of underage children in Marin, both boys and girls. It is here in Marin. Now I'll turn it over to Chris.
Yeah, I've been a detective for just about 3 years, and I have a big focus on these trafficking cases. I felt for a long time that we see a lot of media about international cases and women and children being brought from other countries, which is horrendous. But I felt like for a long time we would see women and teenagers walking up and down our streets that were clearly working in the field of commercial sex, and nothing was really being addressed. There was an FBI statistic from 2012, I believe, that showed for every 100 arrests related to prostitution, 98 of them were women, and 2 of them were men, and that's the demand being the Johns as well as the traffickers. So it really just seemed like something was amiss. So I started working these cases a little bit more to kind of figure out what was actually causing these women to go out there, because I'd never met a kid who decided to put down Barbie and said, I want to be a prostitute when I grow up.
Right.
It just didn't seem realistic. One of the cases that really was a big turning point for myself and my agency was when I came across a 13-year-old girl who ran away from our agency. She had met a couple of other girls in our county, and they told her that they knew someone who lived in Novato that could help her get to Chicago where she wanted to be. Well, ultimately, she came down to Novato and met a trafficker, or in other words, a pimp for those guys. But she had met him, and he started to encourage her at first to do the prostitution, and then really forced her and maintained her to stay in it once she was already engaging in commercial sex. She was 13 years old, and for 4 weeks before we could find her, She was committing commercial sex acts in Novato, San Marin, Novato, San Rafael, Fairfax, Richmond, Oakland, and San Francisco. And she was forced to have sex with at least 6 different men 6 nights a week.
Now, are these young girls, where are they living when this is happening?
Well, if I think Chris would agree with me, many of them are runaways.
Okay.
And the statistics are that within 48 hours, if you're a runaway, the chances are outstanding you're going to be approached by a predator who will first do what we call the Romeo. They will make you feel like you're treasured. They'll buy you things like kids would like, a 13-year-old, maybe a CD, new shoes, and you feel like you're on the top of the world and someone is finally paying attention and caring for you. Then they exploit you and they put you in a hotel room and you start working tricks or having, Johns coming and abusing you. Well, no child is going to want to do that for long. And so at that point, Romeo leaves, and it's like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and the monster arrives and plies you with alcohol, drugs, or all else fails, beats you up, or threatens you or your family.
Right, they're not living in the hotel, though, are they?
They primarily are living in hotels. They're moved from hotel to
Moving around.
hotel.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Or sometimes the traffickers will have an apartment or something else that they'll maintain. So they'll live in one apartment, but in one usually in a similar complex or the same complex. They'll be working out of another apartment. So that way it seems a little safer for the Johns, because Johns don't really think when they show up to an apartment, the police are going to be waiting. Hotels are a little bit more suspicious of usually. But to go along with what we're just talking about, one of the other issues is a lot of them do use abuse once they're already in there, but also humiliation is a really big key factor. A lot of these girls' pictures are put online to advertise the commercial sex. So when they try and leave the trafficker says, well, that's fine. If you want to leave, I'm going to send these naked pictures on a prostitution website to your grandmother, to your mother, to everyone in your school, on Facebook, Twitter. I'm going to post them everywhere if you don't stay with me. And usually these girls don't want to go back and find out and have everyone know what they've been forced to do.
So they could even be living at home and be having something like this happen because there's such control with these guys? Is that what you're saying?
In some cases, most times they're already out of the home and then they try and go back, but then because they can't assimilate because of what this trafficker is doing behind the scenes, they end up running back because they don't know what to do.
But in some cases, for example, gangs are getting really involved in this. Organized crime is already involved because it's next to the drugs and firearm trade. Actually, it's equal to the firearm trade. It is highly profitable. It's even, in some ways, less of a risk, because if I'm a gang member and I'm driving down the street with 3 pounds of cocaine, I'll get arrested, I'll be in jail. If I'm driving down with 3 women, I may never be stopped, and I can sell those women again and again. What they'll do with these girls is they'll very often even have a house that they'll put them in under guard, if you will. They have each kid has their room, and the room is locked unless a customer is coming in and out. And that house can be in any neighborhood. It's not, you think, oh, we'll just be in a lower income neighborhood. No way, it can be anywhere.
Wow, wow. Yeah. I think you shared a story of a young girl with a teddy bear.
Yeah.
Share that one.
And it actually, it had a good outcome, and much was learned. Several years ago, there was a 12-year-old girl who was back east, and she was online, on internet, and Romeo befriended her and made her feel, again, like, he really understood her, because she didn't think her parents or anyone understood her. She felt alienated from her school people, from her parents. There was really no one she felt she could reach out to. So Romeo sends her an airplane ticket to come visit him in California. And she decides to do that. And she takes her teddy bear. She's only 12 years old, right? She gets in a cab.
Did he arrange the cab?
No, he told her what to do, so she calls, and he sent her some money. So she calls a cab, takes the cab to the airport, checks in the airport, gets on the airplane. Halfway to California, holding her teddy bear, she starts to cry. And a stewardess comes up and says, "What's wrong?" They find out what was going on, and she says, "I'm really, I don't know that I really want to go and meet this person I've really never met in real life." And they're going, "Well, that's probably a pretty good reaction." The law enforcement jumped on it. They go to the home, which is in a suburban area.
Oh my gosh.
They bust in and they find 3 other little children her age, 1 boy and 2 girls, locked up in their own rooms, who had been turning tricks anywhere from 6 to 12 a day. As a result of that, airlines now have training, transportation officials have training about, here's some things to look out for. A 12-year-old traveling by themselves without a teddy bear. You probably want to question rather closely about where they're going, who they're going to see, because it is possible that it could have been stopped even before she got to the airport or while she was initially checking in at the airport. Nowadays, I think all of the transportation officials are far more vigilant because that's what it's about, education.
All the security we'd have. You would think you'd notice something with a little girl like that. Oh my gosh, that's terrible, huh?
Well, right in our backyard, Alameda District Attorney's Office has an organization called Heat Watch. They actually train the officials over at the Oakland airport about this particular issue to make sure that they're all on board, whether it's the ticketing agents all the way up to the flight attendants. So even here in the Bay Area, we're seeing those kinds of trainings occurring on a regular basis.
As well as hotels and other agencies being trained. If they show up in a hotel, like little 12-year-old with her teddy bear shows up with an adult who's doing most of the talking, and she's doing hardly any talking and maybe is extremely withdrawn, this is a clue. You may want to call your local law enforcement.
You know, I can understand little girls because, you know, we were all little girls at one time, except for you, of course. But little girls never feel pretty. They never feel pretty enough or beautiful enough or whatever it is. One little pimple can make them just ruin their day. And so it's easy to take in somebody by having Mr. Romeo, as you call him, tell girls how beautiful they are and stuff like that. So, but, you know, the other side of me, I've always sort of kind of made jokes or heard people make jokes of what we call the helicopter parents of today that are just hovering around too obsessively monitoring kids. Where is the kind of the middle ground there?
I don't think there's a middle ground.
You don't
I
think
think,
so?
you know, the kids may get angry at their parent being a helicopter parent, but believe me, when they get to be older, they'll thank their parents. As far as I'm concerned, especially in the day of internet and determining who your friends are, and you know, if your child all of a sudden shows up with a Chanel purse after a weekend with friends, you're probably going to want to be having a questionnaire that you want to find out where they got that purse, under what circumstances, because that can be a clue that they're doing something in terms of applying sex that you don't.
And that leads me to my other concern is what should we be on the lookout besides just a Chanel bag or something like that? What are some things that parents
children's reactions, you mean, or how they're acting? Chris, do you want to take that?
Right. It really comes down to just monitoring what they're doing, because a lot of the cases that I work, it involves Facebook or Twitter or Tumblr or any of these social media sites where you can have a one-on-one interaction with another individual. These guys are great listeners. That's probably their number one weapon, is the act of listening, where parents sometimes have so much going on with work and marriage and other kids and back to school and all of these other things. Teenagers really, and kids, have one focus. It's having fun and going to school. Those are pretty much two focuses, going to school and having fun. The only two things they really need to focus on. So they have a whole lot of time to socialize with other people. The parents don't oftentimes have the ability to look into that. One case in particular, we were serving a search warrant. We looked through Facebook messages. This man would message 30 girls a day minimum. And it would just be like, hey, it was good to see you at the party we went to recently. And out of those 30, probably about a quarter of them would message back and be like, oh, what party did we meet at? And then from there, 2 to 3 or 4 of those girls out of that 30 would ultimately continue conversation over a series of weeks. And usually about 1 out of those girls, from what we can tell, would end up meeting up with him. And his whole goal was just to find more girls to add to his, what he felt was an organization, his business model, to go out and make money for him.
The other thing in terms of watching out with your child is to be observant of any change of behavior. If all of a sudden your child is drinking alcohol, all of a sudden is using drugs, becomes withdrawn, their grades in school plummet, even really, really depressed, starts to cut themselves, just isn't acting like they used to, even withdraws from their past friends, it is a clue that something is going on that your child is probably too embarrassed or too afraid to talk to you about.
So for a parent who hasn't been maybe a real good communicator anyhow, and then to see a change, it's hard for that parent to step in. So what else could that parent do instead of just try to reform themselves all of a sudden and be a good communicator.
Right now in our communities, there are a lot of organizations that are stepping out there to really kind of advocate and educate about what human trafficking is. Really kind of partnering up and having those conversations with people to get educated is a really big factor. There's an organization called the Polaris Project.
What is it again?
Polaris Project.
Polaris Project.
.org. They're a great organization about getting resources about what human trafficking is, how to spot the signs. When you do see that, what are the next steps to be able to kind of address it and deal with those issues?
Counseling agencies.
Counseling,
I can't think of a parent who wouldn't at least try to communicate with their kid and ask what's going on, but if there was some real issue, there are counseling groups too that can step up and contact the child or work through the parent and determine what's going on.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of this stuff is internet-based. You know, it has come along just since the internet, and that's not that many years old.
No.
So has this just grown in a huge way since the internet, or did we have these problems before?
I think we've had these problems since history began, but I think internet, like everything else, has just made it mushroom. I mean, now it used to be maybe you'd have to go through word of mouth to even find where you would find a child that you could exploit and traffic. But now you can go online, and once the exploiter has the children in their domain, they can go online and have a whole menu for their Johns of, you know, age, race, personality, you know, physical characteristics. It's like an internet menu. And a lot of internet agencies or companies have made a lot of money advertising for these exploiters.
Wow.
And Chris could tell you more about that.
I think a big shift is, it's been around forever. We've just called it prostitution, whether it was a kid or an adult.
Yeah.
But right now, I think one of the single most important factors or points in time that I could relate to is probably around 2000, when the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was approved, and it's been reauthorized 3 or 4 times since then. But that actually really gave victims of human trafficking victim status. It finally opened up opportunities for them to get resources. It opened up opportunities for them to be treated differently in the court process, not as a suspect, but as a victim. And since then, you've really seen a huge evolution of the way law enforcement and the district attorney's offices really prosecute these cases. And no longer do we really focus on going after prostitution itself. We focus on the causes of prostitution. No matter what, there's always going to be some element of actual prostitution that are occurring. People who are willingly doing that, usually for economic purposes. But the majority of people, in particular every child, I don't believe any child is a prostitute. They're all victims. We need to find out what exactly is causing that problem. And since 2000, I think that's where we've really seen that shift occurring. And so now in Marin County as well as Sonoma County, we really make an effort to not just target prostitution, but what's pushing that in our communities, and more in particular, the demand. We really harp on that to kind of stop that, because that's what's getting these kids recruited. So kids are being recruited to go out there and commit acts of prostitution because a demand exists. So every time a John or a purchaser calls a known prostitution ad, that trafficker believes there's a demand, whether the act actually occurs or not. Once that phone rings, they know that that demand exists. So the more girls they have, the more girls can make dates. The more girls that make dates, the more money he gets.
And your average pimp can make up to $600,000 a year on one girl.
How much?
$600,000
my
a year
gosh.
on one girl.
Oh.
It's like, I think globally it's a $32 billion business, and in California I think figures are bandied around, but I think $9 billion is a fair estimate.
Well, who are these guys in our community? What do they look like? Are they all gang members, or are they all criminals, or what?
They come from every race, age, economic bracket, and background that you can imagine. You'd like to think that they're, you know, that they look like a raincoat and kind of sleazy looking, or only organized crime and gangs are involved. It can involve anyone from any walk of life.
It's true. I mean, we see a large variety. We see men that are in our community that are every race, every socioeconomic status as well, because it's easy money. And a lot of these traffickers tell the girls, if you get arrested, it's okay, they're just going to get a ticket and they'll boot you out of jail and they'll give you a program in court. Just don't make mention of me and we'll be fine. And these girls love these guys a lot of times because they have that bond with them and it keeps them tied. Exactly.
The Romeo complex.
And so these men, it doesn't really make, there's no real market of, or cookie cutter perception of how these men are going to look, because it's just opportunistic and predatory men who, or in some cases women, who really do want to make money and don't really care at all about these women and children. So it's hard because when you're trying to go to a group of moms and dads and explain, hey, this is what you look for,
It's
you
like,
can't. The most common things are usually it's an older boyfriend or somewhat of an older ability. But one of the cases I worked out of Marin County, the suspect was 19 years old and the victim was 13.
Wow.
And he was running her 6 nights a week. So, but we've also had other cases where my most recent case, he was 53 years old.
And this is in the North Bay. This isn't.
Yeah.
This isn't in some other country. This is here. And since 9/11, when they really have tightened up the borders somewhat, because, or security-wise, we are having more Americans now being the topic of being predators or preyed upon for human trafficking than we did before.
Well, are these gang-related issues? Are majority of them gang-related?
Well, there was an article that was released by the FBI in October of 2012 that stated that a lot of organized crime organizations, whether they're gang members or they're drug dealers or arms dealers, are really switching to the trafficking model, kind of what you described
and
earlier.
And the AG too, Kamala Harris, in the Office of the Attorney General, says the same thing. It's so lucrative that, and the risk is so small for them that they're switching to human trafficking.
Interesting.
Well, when you figure a gun maybe costs $2,000 to purchase by a trafficker and he sells it for $4,000, he made $2,000, but has to procure another gun to be able to sell that. Well, you have one girl who, in this area, Marin County and Sonoma County, they average probably $800 to $1,200 a night. He could make that $2,000 in 2 days, and he can make triple that by the end of the week, and get, before Prop 35 passed, a less sentence for doing that.
Wow. And are these, somebody, I think you mentioned once that even your Uncle Fred, you know, Uncle Bob, whatever, could be a trafficker. How does one recognize somebody like that in your own family or whatever? Is it possible? Does that ever happen? Are those? Is that just imagination or a good story?
Nothing is imagination. Again, you know, all walks of life, all socio and economic backgrounds. Uncle Fred may have a large amount of money that he really can't explain the origin for. Perhaps he takes an abnormal interest in, you know, your young daughters or his nieces or your young sons or his nephews, Chris?
Yeah. We've had cases in particular where grandfathers have run their children or grandchildren and parents as well.
Their own grandchildren?
Yes.
Ugh.
Someone who's exploiting children in a predatory way is not having the normal sense of morality that most people would have. If you're trafficking your own grandchild, you're not what we would call, in my mind at least, someone who has any sense of morality as we know it.
Well, we've been given sort of the closing sign here. Do you have any last stories, just a quick story to share, and then we'll think about last-minute comments to leave with the audience?
I will just talk about the September 14th event and tell everyone that during that event, we're going to have Julian Char.
This is a special event that you're going to have
for human
here?
trafficking, child abduction. We're
on
going to
September 14th, 2014,
Yes,
here in Marin County.
In Marin County from 12 to 5 at the Board of Education building in Terra Linda.
Excellent.
And he has written books, Julian Char, about human trafficking and the impact that it has on young children. Phenomenal speaker. We'll have Aaron Runyon who'll talk about child abduction as well as human trafficking. We'll have survivors of human trafficking, and we'll have solutions, how people can help.
Now, are any of those speakers going to be taped? Are you going to have that on YouTube so others can watch it?
We're going to, our hope is that we're going to videotape the entire presentation and have it available for educational purposes.
Excellent,
Yes.
excellent, excellent.
I've heard Julian speak before. He's amazing. So
Yeah.
Somebody's Daughter is his book. It's wonderful if you get a chance to read it.
Yeah.
The last thing I'd probably bring up is a big thing for me is really talking to people about it, having that conversation. It's a very uncomfortable conversation to have, but really bringing up that it exists in our communities and really changing our vocabulary and our terminology. That's a big thing in our county. We don't call women prostitutes. We call them victims or prostituted females.
Or survivors.
Or survivors. We don't call traffickers pimps because pimp is very glorified in our community. And we don't call the purchasers Johns because a lot of people know someone, John, who's a good person, so we call them purchasers or buyers.
Okay.
We're really trying to change the overall education process and the understanding of what trafficking is, and until that happens, I don't really think that people are going to completely get behind the idea that it isn't a victimless crime.
Wow. Okay. Last minute comments to our viewing audience.
My last minute comment would be become as educated as you can about the area of trafficking, which includes sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and organ trafficking.
And watch an organ. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, we've got more
That's a
programs
topic
to
of
go.
yeah, that's another topic entirely.
Right. So, and I think really watching for those cues with our kids.
Yes.
You know, watch for those cues that you were
Yes.
talking about earlier, and communicate with them whatever's
Yes.
going on there. Well, I want to thank you very much for being here. This has just been very, very profound for us to listen to, and I hope as many people as possible will share this program with others, especially if they have children of those vulnerable ages. And I would like to thank everyone tonight for being here, thanking our guests especially, and thanking the Buck Institute Research on Aging for letting us use this beautiful facility here, and thanking our Seroptimist crew members, Alfredis, I see her back there, and Barbara and Patricia behind the scenes, and Leon Johnson, our engineering technician. And thank you most of all, viewing audience, for being here.